Witness this. September 6th, 1315, Einsiedeln Abbey, 3 months before the battle that would change everything. Swiss fighters from Schwyz Valley are dragging Abbot Johann through the monastery courtyard in chains. He's barefoot, elderly, terrified. Behind him, the abbey is burning. 300 years of consecrated stone, parchment, and prayer going up in smoke visible for 15 miles. The fighters aren't looting quietly. They're making a spectacle. They've stripped the altar of its silver chalices, pulled the golden crucifix from above the sanctuary, and they're melting it down in the courtyard while the monks watch. One of the Swiss men grabs the abbot by his white hair and forces him to his knees in front of the molten silver. Says something the Chronicles don't record, but the abbot never forgot. Then they parade him through Schwyz town square like a war trophy, still in chains, still barefoot, while the townspeople watch in silence that's somehow louder than cheering. This isn't a raid. This is a middle finger carved in precious metal and signed with blasphemy. The abbot will be released 3 days later, humiliated but alive. The message won't need translation. Einsiedeln Abbey was under direct imperial protection. Burning it meant one thing. We don't recognize your authority, we don't fear your consequences, and we're daring you to do something about it. The Swiss had just forced the Habsburgs' hand, and the Habsburgs, being Habsburgs, were going to respond with everything they had. This wasn't rebellion. This was bait. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy the hidden truths of history, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. To understand why Duke Leopold I walked into a trap 3 months later, you have to understand what that burning abbey meant to him personally. This wasn't some distant political problem his advisors could handle with diplomacy. This was a direct assault on everything his family represented. The Habsburgs didn't just rule through force. They ruled through the appearance of inevitability, the carefully maintained fiction that their authority was as permanent as the mountains themselves. And the Swiss had just demonstrated, in front of witnesses, with fire and chains and melted silver, that this fiction was negotiable. When word reached Leopold at his castle in November, he wasn't receiving a report about a minor provincial incident. He was receiving a test of whether his family's power meant anything at all. Leopold was 24 years old, built like someone who'd never missed a meal, educated in warfare the way nobles learned it, through tournaments, garrison duty, and tactical manuals written by men who'd never seen real combat. He'd been raised on the assumption that Habsburgs won because Habsburgs always won. His uncle had been Holy Roman Emperor. His brother Frederick was currently fighting for that same crown against Ludwig of Bavaria. Every decision Leopold made carried the weight of family expectation and the shadow of older, more proven men. This expedition to Schwyz wasn't just about punishing farmers. It was about Leopold proving he belonged in the same sentence as his ancestors. The abbey burning had given him that opportunity, or so he thought. November 9th, 1315. Leopold receives the order from his brother. It's not a request. It's an imperial command wrapped in family obligation. Punish Schwyz. Make it visible. Have them on their knees by Christmas. The timeline is specific because Frederick needs this resolved before winter, before the imperial election moves forward, before the Swiss defiance becomes a story other regions might want to copy. Leopold agrees immediately. Too quickly, maybe. He's already calculating the logistics before he's finished reading the order. 6 days to assemble the force. 9,000 to 12,000 men, depending on which mercenaries accept the contract. Cost equivalent to 3 months of imperial revenue, just for the soldiers, not counting equipment, supplies, horses, wagons. This is an army sized for a campaign, mobilized for what should be a police action. The scale itself is meant to send a message. Resist us and we don't negotiate, we overwhelm. Leopold studies the map on his oak table, tracing the route with one finger. Zug to Morgarten Pass to Schwyz. Straight line. 2 days of marching, maybe 3 if the weather turns. The pass is narrow, yes, but his scouts report it open. No fortifications, no defensive positions. The Swiss haven't even blocked the road. To Leopold, this confirms what he already believes. They know they can't win. They're going to surrender the moment they see his banners, and this entire expedition is going to be a very expensive, very muddy victory march that ends with some public executions and a renewed tax agreement. His marshal asks about cavalry deployment in the pass. Leopold barely looks up. "If they stay on the road," the scout had said. Leopold heard that as confirmation, not warning. The conversation he has with his marshal 3 days before departure tells you everything about his assumptions. The marshal suggests sending advance scouts into the forest above the pass, just as a precaution. Leopold cuts him off. For what? Ghosts? He's not being arrogant, exactly. He's being reasonable based on everything he's been taught about how power works. Farmers don't fight professional armies. They submit or they run. The idea that they might do neither doesn't exist in his mental model of how the world operates. But here's what Leopold doesn't know, can't know, because no one in his court has ever thought to ask. The Swiss aren't preparing to surrender. They're preparing to teach him what farmers know about slaughtering livestock. November 13th, 2 days before the battle, the War Council meets in Schwyz. This isn't a democratic assembly where everyone gets a vote. This is a hard conversation about acceptable losses led by men who've already decided what needs to happen. Werner Stauffacher, composite figure, real name, represents the generation of Swiss leadership that understood one thing Leopold didn't: terrain votes. He's standing over a map on the floor, stones marking positions, surrounded by men ranging from 16-year-old boys to 60-year-old veterans of previous skirmishes. The weapons leaning against the timber walls tell you what kind of fight they're planning. Halberds. 9-foot poleaxes with hooks and spikes designed for one job: punching through armor and pulling riders off horses. Morning stars, boar spears. Nothing ceremonial, everything functional. Stauffacher lays out the plan, and it requires something that makes half the room uncomfortable. They're going to let Leopold enter the pass, not fight him at the entrance where they could hold a defensive line for maybe 6 to 8 hours before being flanked and overwhelmed. They're going to let the Habsburg vanguard ride past their positions, let the infantry column pack into the killing zone, then hit them from above, from the flanks, at the center, and both ends simultaneously. The knights won't be able to turn around on the narrow road. The rear guard won't be able to advance through the men dying in front of them. And the infantry in the middle won't be able to see what's killing them until it's too late. An older fighter asks the obvious question: "And if they don't enter the pass?" Stauffacher's response is pure cold accounting. "Then we've lost nothing but sleep. But they will. Leopold thinks he's punishing farmers. We're going to teach him what farmers know about slaughtering livestock." The room goes quiet, because everyone understands what he's actually saying. This isn't going to be a battle. It's going to be a massacre, and they're going to have to live with that. They're going to have to look at the bodies afterward, strip the armor, loot the supplies, and somehow process the fact that they just killed thousands of men in 40 minutes using geography as a weapon. The question isn't whether they can do it. They've already calculated the mechanics. The question is whether they can stomach it. Stauffacher puts his hand on the map where the road narrows most, between mountain and lake, and delivers the calculus that will define Swiss military doctrine for the next 200 years. They'll have knights in front, infantry in the middle, supply wagons at the rear. We let the knights pass. We let the infantry pass. Then we hit the center and both ends at once. The knights can't turn around. The rear can't advance. And the men in the middle can't see what's killing them. Think horror movie logic. Don't fight the monster in the open. Lure it into a basement. Lock the door. Burn the house. This wasn't bravery. It was accounting. They'd calculated exactly how many of them could die and still call it victory. The number was higher than anyone wanted to say out loud, but lower than what they'd lose in a conventional battle. The math was brutal and clear. 1,300 to 1,500 Swiss fighters against 9,000 professional soldiers. On an open field, that's suicide. In a mountain pass where the road is 12 feet wide, the lake is 6 meters deep, and the forest slopes at 45 degrees, that's physics. And physics doesn't care about armor. But to understand why this was going to work, you need to see what Leopold was about to march into. Morgarten Pass isn't a pass the way you're imagining it. Delete that image. A pass suggests 2 exits, open sky, room to maneuver. This was a hallway, 3.2 kilometers of road squeezed between Lake Aigeri on one side and forested mountain slope on the other. The road width varies from 12 to 15 feet at its widest points, narrow enough that cavalry could ride 8 to 10 men abreast if they maintained perfect formation, which they wouldn't because the road was mud in November and horses don't like walking next to dark water they can smell but can't see the bottom of. The lake depth at the road's edge ranged from 6 to 15 meters, drowning depth if you're wearing 60 pounds of armor. The forest canopy was thick enough to block sightlines beyond 30 meters. You could have 300 men hidden 50 feet from the road, and no one on that road would see them until they were already dying. Leopold's scouts had checked this. They'd ridden through, reported back that the pass was open, confirmed the road was navigable for cavalry. Everything technically true. What they hadn't reported, because Leopold hadn't asked, was whether the forest was empty. They'd looked at the road. They hadn't looked up. The Swiss had counted on this. They knew how noble reconnaissance worked. Scouts check for fortifications, blocked paths, obvious defensive positions. They don't check for men willing to sit in cold forest for 18 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to turn a road into an abattoir. Leopold asked his chief scout one question: "Can we get cavalry through?" The scout said yes. And technically, he was right. You could get cavalry through. The question Leopold should have asked was whether you could get them back out. November 15th, dawn. Leopold's army is already 9 hours into what should have been a 6-hour march from Zug. The mud is worse than expected. The column has stretched out over 2.5 kilometers because the men in front are moving faster than the supply wagons in back can keep up. The weather is cold, overcast, that particular kind of gray November morning where sunrise doesn't so much happen as the darkness just becomes slightly less dark. Temperature around 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. Visibility poor. The men are cold, wet, and confused about why this requires an army. The grumbling among the infantry is constant, but quiet enough that the knights don't hear it. Leopold rides near the front with his heavy cavalry, 200 knights in full plate armor, the visible symbol of Habsburg power, and the tactical hammer he's planning to bring down on Schwyz the moment anyone shows resistance. Except no one's showing resistance. The pass entrance is open. The road is clear. Leopold takes this as confirmation of everything he believed. They're not going to fight. This is going to be a very expensive parade. He's already thinking about what comes after. The speech he'll give in Schwyz Square, the terms he'll dictate, the taxes that will be collected with interest, the public example that will be made of whoever burned that abbey. His marshal rides up, trying one more time to suggest caution. "My lord, the men need rest. We've been marching since dawn." Leopold doesn't even look at him. "We rest when we reach Schwyz. I want to be inside their valleys by nightfall tomorrow." The marshal tries again. "The scouts report the pass ahead. Should we send advance?" Leopold cuts him off with the certainty of someone who's never been wrong about anything important. The pass is open. We march through. A knight near Leopold tries to lighten the mood with a joke about the pace. "At this rate, they'll die of old age before we reach them." Leopold doesn't smile. "At this pace, I'll die of embarrassment." He's fighting the wrong battle already. Not against the Swiss, but against his timeline, his brother's expectations, his own need to prove this was worth the cost. Every decision after this moment is downstream from that pressure. And pressure, it turns out, makes you miss things. Like the fact that an open road through a mountain pass isn't an invitation. It's a question. And the question is, are you stupid enough to answer it? The vanguard enters the pass at 7 in the morning. The main body follows. 4,000 infantry packed into that 3-kilometer corridor between mountain and lake. Supply wagons at the rear. Still 2 kilometers behind, struggling through mud that's getting worse because 9,000 men and hundreds of horses have already churned it into soup. Leopold is in the middle section, surrounded by his personal guard, watching the forest slopes and seeing nothing. Because there's nothing to see. The Swiss are there, 800 men positioned 150 meters above the road, hidden in beech and oak forest, sitting in groups, breathing visible in the cold air, watching the Habsburg column thread itself into the trap like a needle through cloth. They've been there since yesterday afternoon. 18 hours of waiting. No fires, no sound. Discipline that would impress professional soldiers, except these aren't professional soldiers. They're farmers and tradesmen who've spent the last 3 months drilling for this exact scenario. Stauffacher moves through the positions, checking readiness, finding a young fighter shivering from cold and terror in equal measure. Doesn't give him a speech about courage, just tells him the truth. Fear keeps you sharp. Just remember, we hit them when they can't hit back. This isn't a fair fight. It's a slaughter. And that's the point. 7:15 a.m. A scout signals to Stauffacher. The entire column is in the pass. Vanguard too far ahead to turn back. Main body packed in the killing zone. Rear guard hasn't entered yet. Perfect. Stauffacher lifts a horn to his lips. Pauses. Looks one more time at the column below. Thousands of men who have no idea what's about to happen to them. Then he blows. Single note, echoing off the mountains. And the forest comes alive. But to understand what happened in the next 40 minutes, you need to understand what those Swiss fighters were actually capable of, why Leopold's professional soldiers didn't stand a chance, and how a weapon designed for killing livestock became the thing that killed the age of cavalry. That's where we're going next. The history books will tell you this was a fight between oppressed mountain peasants and an evil empire. Delete that story. It's propaganda from both sides, smoothed over 700 years until it's comfortable enough to teach to children. The truth is messier and more interesting. The Swiss weren't primitive farmers rising against tyranny. They were a proto-state that had figured out collective security while most of Europe was still feudal. And they were about to weaponize terrain in ways that would change how wars were fought for the next 2 centuries. The Habsburgs weren't evil overlords. They were late-stage empire running on a business model that required constant revenue to maintain itself and the Swiss had just canceled a subscription the Habsburgs couldn't afford to lose. This wasn't good versus evil. This was a systems failure at the intersection of geography, economics, and ego, and it was about to get very bloody. Start with what Swiss actually meant in 1315. Not a nation, not even really a confederation yet in any formal sense. 3 valley communities, Uri, Schwyz, Unterwalden, that had signed a mutual defense pact 24 years earlier and were slowly realizing that being neighbors with shared interests beat being subjects of distant lords who'd never climbed a mountain in their lives. Combined population maybe 15 to 20,000 people spread across alpine territory that ranged from 800 to 1,400 meters above sea level. These weren't the lowland peasants you're imagining, the ones who spent their lives bent over wheat fields. These were cattle farmers, loggers, cheesemakers, rope bridge builders. People whose daily work involved hauling timber up 40-degree slopes, managing livestock in terrain where a misstep meant a 100-meter fall, and dealing with weather that could kill you in October if you weren't paying attention. Physical competence wasn't optional. It was baseline. Werner Stauffacher, your anchor into this world, was typical in that regard. 40-something years old in 1315, from Schwyz canton, owned land and cattle and enough political weight that people listened when he spoke in the Landsgemeinde, the open-air assembly where men voted on war and peace by show of hands. 3 months before Morgarten, you could find him doing what he did most days, overseeing a cattle drive up a slope so steep it would give modern hikers pause, barking orders in Schweizerdeutsch that was already diverging from the German spoken in the lowlands, carrying a sick calf on his shoulders because losing livestock meant losing income and no one else was going to do it for you. The physical competence was casual, automatic. This was his office. This was what made the Swiss different. They weren't asking for freedom as an abstract principle. They'd been governing themselves through direct democracy for decades, and they were not about to let someone who'd never seen snow in July tell them how to run their valleys. Their economy was simple and strategic: cattle, cheese, and tolls from controlling the St. Gotthard Pass, one of the major trade routes over the Alps. That pass was the strategic asset that made them worth noticing. Italian merchants heading to German markets, German goods heading to Italian cities, all of it funneled through narrow mountain roads that the Swiss could close whenever they wanted. The revenue from those tolls wasn't massive, but it was steady, and it made the 3 cantons something more than subsistence farmers. It made them a speed bump in European trade, and speed bumps, it turns out, have leverage. The political structure was almost accidentally modern. Uri and Schwyz had something close to direct democracy. Every man who owned property or could prove he could support himself got a vote. Unterwalden had elected councils. No hereditary nobility running things, no bishops claiming divine right. Just men arguing in meadows about tax rates and defense obligations and whether to repair the bridge before or after harvest. It was chaotic and loud, and it worked because everyone had skin in the game. You voted to go to war, you went to war. You voted for a tax, you paid it. Accountability was direct and immediate. The military obligation flowed from this. Every able-bodied man between 16 and 60 owned weapons and drilled 4 times a year. Not professional soldiers. Militia. But militia who took it seriously because they knew exactly what would happen if they didn't. They'd seen what happened to valleys that couldn't defend themselves. They became someone else's property. This is what Leopold didn't understand. He thought peasant meant helpless. These men weren't helpless. They were specialized. Spending your life at 1,200 meters hauling timber, fighting weather, And managing half-ton animals doesn't make you soft. It makes you a specific kind of dangerous. The kind that knows how to kill things bigger than themselves because they'd been doing it to livestock for their entire lives. Now go back to 1291, August 1st, the Federal Charter. 3 representatives from Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden meeting on a meadow. Traditional location is the Rütli, though the exact spot is more myth than history. They're drafting an agreement that sounds boring until you read what it actually says. Mutual defense, rejection of foreign judges, agreement to arbitrate disputes internally, the key clause that would matter 24 years later. We will accept no judge who has obtained his office for money or who is not a resident and member of our valleys. Translation: we'll pay taxes to the empire, but not to Habsburg administrators who bought their positions and don't understand how things work up here. Legally, it was almost technical. Practically, it was a time bomb. Because what they were saying, in the careful language of medieval diplomacy, was this: we don't recognize your authority to tell us how to live. The Habsburgs' response in 1291? Nothing. They ignored it. They had bigger problems: inheritance disputes, wars with neighbors, papal politics, 3 mountain valleys signing a mutual defense pact barely registered. For 24 years, the document sat there, not quite rebellion, not quite loyalty, just an ambiguous arrangement that everyone could live with as long as no one pushed. But then, the money situation changed. By 1315, the Habsburgs were cash-strapped and overextended in ways that made the Swiss technicality intolerable. Duke Frederick the Handsome, Leopold's older brother, was in the middle of fighting Ludwig of Bavaria for the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. That fight was expensive. Estimated cost: 100,000 to 150,000 silver marks. Frederick needed revenue from every source he could claim, and the Swiss refusing to pay taxes to Habsburg-appointed judges was now a strategic problem, not a minor administrative annoyance. Here's where you need to see the Habsburg machine with respect, not contempt. They weren't bumbling aristocrats playing at empire. They were running the largest continuous territory in Central Europe outside France: Austria, parts of Switzerland, Swabia, scattered holdings across a dozen regions. This required infrastructure: roads, garrisons, courts, tax collection, diplomatic correspondence. It required money, constant money. And the Swiss contribution to that revenue was small in absolute terms, maybe 8 to 12%, but symbolically catastrophic. If 3 valleys could refuse payment, why couldn't 30 cities? The Habsburgs had built a system that required constant revenue to maintain itself. And systems don't negotiate. They enforce or they collapse. Frederick understood this. Leopold was about to learn it. Council meeting in Vienna, winter 1314. Frederick is looking at account books showing red ink where Swiss revenue should be. He points to the map. The Swiss territories circled. Looks at his younger brother. If we can't collect from 3 valleys, how do we collect from 30 cities? Make an example. Make it visible. Leopold receives this not as a suggestion, but as a test of his competence and his worth to the family. Because that's the other thing you need to understand about Leopold. He's 24 years old, competent in the ways young nobles are competent: sword drills, tournament combat, garrison administration, but untested in actual field command. This is his chance to step out of Frederick's shadow, to prove he's not just the spare heir, but someone who can handle responsibility. Every decision he makes from this point forward is filtered through that need. He can't afford caution. He can't afford delay. He can't afford to come back from Schwyz with anything less than total victory. Think of it as the middle management trap at scale. Your promotion depends on results. Results require speed, but speed requires risk. And the risks don't show up on the quarterly report until it's too late. Leopold is operating inside a system of incentives that makes the smart move look like the cautious move, and caution looks like weakness. And weakness is the one thing his family can't afford to show right now. So when the abbey burns in September, when the Swiss drag Abbot Johann through the streets and melt down consecrated silver in front of witnesses, Leopold doesn't see a tactical problem requiring careful planning. He sees an opportunity to demonstrate decisiveness. The scale of the force he assembles tells you everything. 9,000 to 12,000 men for what should be a police action. That's not military necessity. That's messaging. It's saying, resist us and we don't negotiate. We overwhelm. But here's the thing about overwhelming force. It requires logistics, feeding 9,000 men, moving them over muddy November roads, coordinating cavalry, infantry, supply wagons, keeping morale up when most of the soldiers don't understand why they're marching through cold rain to punish farmers. Leopold is good at the planning on paper part. What he's never done is deal with the friction that happens when paper meets terrain. The timeline he commits to, 2 to 3 days from Zug to Schwyz, is based on summer roads and ideal conditions. It's November. The roads are mud, but admitting that means admitting the plan needs adjustment, and adjusting the plan means looking indecisive, and indecision is what weak commanders do. So he pushes. Harder. The night before the march, Leopold rehearses his victory speech, gets frustrated, starts over. A servant asks if he needs anything. Leopold snaps. I need them to fight. I need one of them to fight so I can show what happens when you resist. Then quieter, revealing the assumption that's going to kill him. But they won't. They'll surrender the moment they see us. That assumption isn't stupidity. It's pattern recognition based on how power had always worked in his world. Nobles commanded, commoners obeyed. If commoners resisted, you showed up with overwhelming force and they submitted because the alternative was death, and everyone understood that calculation. Leopold genuinely cannot imagine a scenario where farmers choose death over submission when facing professional soldiers with a 10-to-1 numerical advantage. The idea exists outside his mental model of reality. Meanwhile, in Schwyz, Stauffacher is preparing for exactly that scenario, because the Swiss have something Leopold doesn't know about yet. A weapon. Not a secret weapon. The Habsburgs know what a halberd is, but a weapon system they've spent 20 years perfecting for one specific job. Show this through scene, not lecture. 3 weeks before the battle, Stauffacher is teaching his 17-year-old son the technique. They're in a meadow behind the house, using a training halberd that's dulled but still heavy. 6 to 9 feet of ash wood shaft, axe blade on one side, spike on the other, hook on the back. The boy swings too early, overextends, loses balance. Stauffacher stops him. Swing too early, you miss. Swing too late, you're dead. Wait for the moment his weight commits forward. Then you're not fighting him. You're using his momentum against him. The halberd wasn't new technology. Polearms had existed for centuries. What the Swiss figured out was optimization. They'd asked a specific question. How do you kill a man in 60 pounds of armor riding a 600-kilogram animal when you can't afford armor yourself and you can't outrun him? The answer was physics. A 9-foot pole with 3.5 kilograms of steel on the end. Swung by a man who's been hauling timber since age 14, generates about 400 to 500 pounds of force on impact. The hook could penetrate chainmail. The spike could punch through plate armor at the joints. The axe blade could cut through leather and wood. And the length meant you could hit cavalry before they could hit you with their lances, assuming you were fighting in tight quarters where they couldn't build momentum for a proper charge. The Swiss had been drilling with these weapons since childhood. Every man had one. Every man knew the two-line formation: front rank strikes, back rank ready to step through if the front goes down. It was asymmetric design at its finest. They didn't try to out-knight the knights. They built a tool optimized for the one scenario where knights were vulnerable, confined spaces where maneuverability died, and they'd chosen their scenario carefully. Morgarten Pass wasn't a battlefield they stumbled into. It was terrain they'd weaponized years before Leopold's army even assembled. Stauffacher had walked that road 100 times, measured it, calculated the angles, figured out exactly where the forest was thick enough to hide men, where the slope was steep enough to let gravity assist a downhill charge, where the lake was close enough to the road that panicked horses would bolt into drowning depth. This wasn't improvisation. This was engineering. They'd done everything but paint the kill zone with markers. The War Council in November was about confirming what everyone already knew. Let Leopold enter the pass. Hit him when he can't maneuver. Make it fast and brutal enough that the survivors spend more time running than fighting. An older fighter asks the question that's on everyone's mind. And if our discipline breaks? If we can't hold position while we watch knights ride past? Stauffacher's answer is cold and practical. Then we die like everyone else who faced cavalry in open battle. But our discipline won't break, because we're not waiting for courage, we're waiting for geometry. And geometry doesn't require bravery, it just requires patience. This is what Leopold is riding toward. Not farmers with pitchforks, not desperate peasants making a last stand. Professional ambush executed by men who'd spent 3 months preparing for 40 minutes of violence. The Swiss had done the math. Conventional battle. They'd lose 400 to 600 men and probably get overrun within hours. Ambush in the pass. They'd lose maybe 50 to 100 and could collapse Leopold's column in 30 minutes. The cost-benefit analysis was brutal but clear. They weren't choosing the brave option. They were choosing the option that killed more of the enemy while losing fewer of themselves. This wasn't heroism. It was accounting. And now both sides were moving into position. November 14th, Leopold's army departing Zug. 9,000 men strung out over 2.5 kilometers, moving at 3 kilometers per hour through mud that sucked at boots and hooves with every step. The confidence was still there, but starting to crack around the edges. Men were cold, wet, wondering why this required an army. Officers were dealing with the friction between timeline and reality. The march was taking twice as long as planned, and Leopold was pushing them to move faster, which just made the column stretch out more, which made coordination harder. The machine was developing stress fractures before it even reached the enemy. That same day, the Swiss were settling into the forest above Morgarten Pass. 800 men on the slopes, 500 more at the southern exit ready to close the trap. Weapons laid out, rocks piled for rolling, positions marked, no fires, no sound, just waiting. Stauffacher moving through the groups, checking readiness, his face showing nothing. Someone asks when Leopold will arrive. Stauffacher looks at the gray sky, calculating. Tomorrow morning, early. They'll want to be through the pass before noon. Another voice. And if they don't enter? Stauffacher smiles for the first time in days. Thin smile, no warmth. Then we've spent 2 cold nights in the forest for nothing. But they'll enter. Leopold needs a quick victory more than he needs a safe one. And quick means taking the direct route. He pauses, looks at the road below, empty for now, soon to be full of men who don't know they're already dead. They'll enter, and we'll make sure they regret it. The pieces were locking into place. Geography had already voted. The Habsburgs just didn't know it yet. All that remained was for Leopold to confirm what the Swiss had predicted, that he would choose speed over caution, assumption over reconnaissance, and the appearance of strength over the reality of terrain. The trap was set. The bait was laid, and the predator was walking straight into it, convinced he was the hunter. Here's what Stauffacher understood that Leopold didn't. Battles aren't won by who has more men. They're won by who controls the equation. And the equation at Morgarten was simple. Take a confined space, add gravity, add surprise, subtract the ability to maneuver. The answer writes itself. The Swiss plan wasn't complicated. Complicated plans fall apart when the first man dies. This was elegant in its brutality. Let the enemy enter a corridor they can't escape. Hit them from an angle they can't defend. Keep hitting until they break or die. Then stop because you don't have the numbers to chase them and you don't need to. The goal wasn't to destroy Leopold's army. It was to make the cost of fighting in the mountains so catastrophic that no one would try again for a generation. Terror was the objective. Dead Habsburgs were just the method. November 14th, early morning. Leopold's army assembles outside Zug in the cold and the mud. 9,000 men in various states of readiness. The heavy cavalry looks professional, plate armor polished, horses groomed, lances gleaming even in gray light. These are the men who cost their families 10 years of income to equip. They know it. They carry themselves like investments that need to pay off. Behind them, the professional infantry, mix of German and Swiss mercenaries who've taken Habsburg coin, armed with spears and swords and the kind of hard pragmatism that comes from fighting for money instead of belief. Then the conscripts, local levies who'd rather be home. Farmers and tradesmen pressed into service who understand they're here to fill space and absorb arrows if it comes to that. At the rear, supply wagons, 30 carts loaded with food, tents, spare weapons, the portable infrastructure that keeps an army from becoming a mob. Leopold rides the line before they march, gives a speech that's probably meant to be inspiring, but comes out sounding impatient. The men need to understand this is about imperial authority, about teaching lessons, about showing the Swiss that resistance has consequences. Most of them are too cold and too bored to care about the politics. They just want to get through the march, collect their pay, and go home. Leopold doesn't notice the disconnect. He's already thinking about Schwyz, about the surrender negotiations, about the letter he'll write to his brother describing the swift resolution. His marshal, older man, veteran of actual campaigns, name lost to history but presence felt in every conversation, tries one more time to suggest sending scouts ahead into the forest above the pass. Leopold waves him off. Not dismissive exactly, just confident in a way that doesn't allow for worst-case scenarios. The pass is open. We move through. If they want to fight, we'll crush them in an hour. The marshal doesn't argue. There's no percentage in arguing with a commander who's decided the outcome before the battle starts. They march. Immediately the timeline starts breaking down. The road from Zug to Morgarten is only 15 kilometers, but it might as well be 50. November, mud. Cold rain. The column stretches as the wagons fall behind. Cavalry in front, making decent time. Infantry slowing as boots sink 6 inches with each step. Supply train grinding to walking pace. Leopold keeps pushing them forward because stopping means admitting the plan is already failing, and admitting that means looking weak. By nightfall, they've covered maybe 8 kilometers. They're supposed to be at the pass entrance. They're not even close. Men are exhausted, hungry, wet. Officers are managing small rebellions, groups of conscripts who want to stop, build fires, sleep. Leopold overrules them. They march through the night, slower, quieter. The confidence from the morning is gone, replaced by the grinding misery of forced movement through terrain that doesn't care about your schedule. Meanwhile, 3 kilometers ahead, the Swiss are settling into position. 800 men spread across the slope above Morgarten Pass, positioned in groups of 30 to 50, each group with a designated strike zone, each man knowing exactly when to move and where. They've been drilling this for weeks. Not the violence. You can't really drill for killing people until you've done it. But the movement, the timing, the discipline of waiting while targets walk past you. Stauffacher is moving between groups, checking weapons, checking faces, looking for the ones who might break when it matters. Finds a kid, maybe 19, from Uri Canton, first time in anything resembling combat. The kid's hands are shaking, not from cold. Stauffacher doesn't give him a pep talk, just looks at him. "You know what we're doing here?" Kid nods. "Then do it or don't. But if you run before the signal, you'll get men killed. And I'll find you after." Not a threat, a fact. The kid stops shaking. 2 other figures matter enough to name. Arnold von Winkelried, no relation to the later hero of the same name, just a Unterwalden fighter who's done this kind of work before. Smaller ambushes against Habsburg tax collectors. He's the one Stauffacher trusts to lead the blocking force at the southern exit. Quiet man, economical with words and movement. When Stauffacher asks if his group is ready, Arnold just holds up his halberd. "We've been ready since September." The weapon is notched, used. This isn't his first time turning geography into a weapon. The other is Rudolf Redding, young commander from Schwyz, mid-20s, tasked with coordinating the boulder rolling teams. It's not as simple as pushing rocks downhill. You need timing. You need to calculate trajectory so the boulders hit the road where the column is densest, not where it's already broken. Reading has spent 2 days marking trees with chalk, sight lines from different positions, calculating angles like he's planning artillery fire, except his artillery is gravity and limestone. Stauffacher watches him work and sees something useful, a man who understands violence as engineering. That's the kind of mind that wins ambushes. The waiting is harder than the planning. November 14th turns into November 15th. The Swiss spend 18 hours in the forest. Temperature drops to near freezing. No fires, no talking above a whisper. Men sitting in groups, sharing body heat, eating hard cheese and dried meat, drinking water from skins that are starting to freeze at the edges. Some of them sleep, most don't. You can't sleep when you're this cold and this keyed up. Stauffacher doesn't sleep. He's running through the plan again and again, looking for the point where it could fail. The failure points are obvious. 1. Leopold doesn't enter the pass. 2. Swiss discipline breaks and they attack too early. 3. The Habsburg vanguard realizes what's happening and turns back fast enough to warn the main column. 4. Weather gets bad enough that visibility drops to nothing and the Swiss can't see when to strike. He can't control points, 1 or 4. Points 2 and 3 depend on his men holding formation, and the Habsburgs being exactly as overconfident as he's betting they'll be. Around midnight, a scout comes back with news. Leopold's column stopped for the night 3 kilometers north of the pass entrance. They'll resume at first light. Stauffacher does the math. First light is around 6:30. March time from there to the pass entrance, 45 minutes to an hour. Time for the vanguard to traverse the killing zone, 12 to 15 minutes. The vanguard needs to be past the strike point before the main column enters. Otherwise, the knights can turn around and warn everyone. The window is tight. Stauffacher gathers his section leaders, walks through the timing one more time. The horn blows when 3 things are true. 1. Vanguard is too far ahead to turn back quickly. 2. Main infantry body is packed in the killing zone. 3. Rear guard hasn't entered yet. If all 3 aren't true, we wait. If we wait too long and they get through, we've lost nothing but sleep. If we strike too early, we die. One of the leaders asks what happens if Leopold spots them before the signal. Stauffacher's answer is matter of fact. Then we charge anyway and hope momentum carries us through, but he won't spot us. He's not looking up. He's looking ahead, thinking about what he'll do when he reaches Schwyz. Now pull back and see the terrain itself, because this is where the trap stops being theoretical and becomes material. Morgarten Pass, 3.2 kilometers of road carved into the eastern shore of Lake Ageri. The lake is on the right as you're heading south toward Schwyz. Dark water, kidney-shaped, deep enough that you can't see the bottom even in summer. On the left, mountain slope, not a cliff, a forested hillside that rises at 35 to 45 degrees, beech and oak trees, thick canopy. Leaf litter from years of undisturbed forest, making the ground soft and silent underfoot. The road itself varies in width from 12 to 15 feet at the widest points, narrowing to maybe 10 feet in 2 critical locations. That width means cavalry can ride 8 to 10 abreast if they're disciplined and the footing is good. In November, mud with nervous horses, you're looking at 6 abreast, maybe less. Infantry can pack tighter, but only if they're in marching formation, not battle formation. To deploy shields and spears, you need space. There's no space. The killing zone starts about 1 kilometer into the pass where the road narrows to its tightest point and the forest is closest to the water. This is where Stauffacher has positioned the bulk of his force. The slope here is steep enough that a man running downhill builds serious momentum, steep enough that a horse can't charge uphill without slipping, shallow enough that you can still control your descent if you've practiced. The Swiss have practiced. They've marked the trees. They know exactly which ones to use as handholds when they start the charge. They know where the ground is solid and where it's soft. They know the distance from their positions to the road, 150 meters, and they know they can cover that in 15 to 20 seconds at a full sprint. Leopold's men, if they spot the Swiss coming, will have maybe 10 seconds to react. Not enough time to form a defensive line. Not enough time to do anything except die in an order someone else decided. The lake is the other half of the trap. Water that close to the road does 2 things. First, it restricts movement. You can't retreat to the right because the right is drowning. Second, it creates panic. Horses smell water they can't see the bottom of and they get nervous. Men wearing 60 pounds of armor know that water means death, and they edge away from it, which compresses the column even tighter. The Swiss are counting on this. They're counting on the road becoming a psychological trap before it becomes a physical one. Fear will do half the work before the halberds even strike. Leopold enters this geometry at 7 in the morning, November 15th. The sun is barely up. Visibility is poor, mist rising from the lake. The vanguard, 200 heavy cavalry, reaches the pass entrance and pauses. Standard procedure. Let the scouts confirm the road ahead is clear. The scouts ride forward maybe 200 meters, see nothing concerning, ride back. Road is clear, no fortifications, no defenders, no sign of resistance. The vanguard commander makes the call. They proceed. Leopold is 30 minutes behind them with the main infantry body. He's irritable from a night of broken sleep and cold rations. When word comes back that the vanguard has entered the pass without incident, he takes it as confirmation of everything he's believed all along. The Swiss aren't going to fight. This is a road march that ends with a surrender ceremony. His marshal tries one final time, not quite arguing, just suggesting, "My lord, the forest..." Leopold cuts him off mid-sentence. The forest is empty. If they were going to fight, they would have blocked the entrance. We're wasting time. The column moves forward. 4,000 men filtering into the pass in a long snake of steel and flesh and wood. They're not in combat formation. They're in marching formation, weapons shouldered, talking among themselves, complaining about the mud and the cold. Nobody's watching the forest. Why would they? The road is the threat. The road is where enemies appear. The forest is just scenery. Above them, Stauffacher is watching. He's positioned himself where he can see the greatest length of road, using gaps in the canopy like windows. He can see the vanguard passing below his position, already 200 meters ahead. He can see the main column entering the killing zone, bunching up, because the road is narrow, and the men are tired, and nobody's maintaining formation spacing. He can see the rear guard hasn't entered yet. All three conditions met, but he waits. He's watching Leopold specifically, trying to identify him by the quality of his armor, the position in the column, the number of bodyguards. There, middle of the main column, surrounded by knights in Habsburg colors, too far in to turn back, too far from the vanguard to coordinate with them. Perfect. Stauffacher lifts the horn to his lips. The horn is simple. Cow horn, polished, no decoration. Single note instrument. But in these mountains, that single note will carry for a kilometer. Everyone knows what it means. The men around him are already standing, weapons ready, eyes on him. He looks one more time at the column below. Thousands of men who came here to punish farmers, who brought overwhelming force to solve a political problem, who assumed that numbers and armor meant they'd already won. He thinks about the burning abbey, about the abbot in chains, about the calculation that started this. Make Vienna come for us angry. Make them commit to ground they don't understand. Make them pay for every meter. He blows the horn, single note, clear and sharp and final. The sound echoes off the far side of the lake, bounces back, seems to come from everywhere at once. For a moment, nothing happens. The Habsburg column keeps moving, men looking around trying to figure out where the sound came from, officers shouting questions that nobody can answer. Then the forest moves. 800 men stand up simultaneously from positions they've held for 18 hours. The Habsburg soldiers on the road see it happening, and for a few seconds their brains can't process it. The forest was empty. Now it's full of men. Where did they come from? How long have they been there? The questions are irrelevant because the Swiss are already running downhill, halberds raised, gravity pulling them faster with every step, and the distance is closing, and there's no time to form a line, no time to deploy shields, no time to do anything except realize that the road they thought was safe was actually a killing floor, and they've been standing on it for the last 5 minutes, waiting for the blade to fall. Leopold hears the horn, doesn't understand what it means, looks up at the slope just like every other man in the column, sees the Swiss coming. His first thought, reconstructed from survivor accounts, where did they come from? His second thought, how many? His third thought, the one that arrives too late to matter, we need to get out of here. He starts shouting orders, but his voice is drowned by the sound of 800 men running through leaf litter, by the first screams from the men at the column's flank who are about to learn what a halberd does to chain mail, by the crashing sound of the first boulder hitting the road and taking a horse's legs out from under it. The trap has closed. Geography has voted. And the Habsburgs are about to discover that there's a particular kind of mathematics that happens when terrain gets a say in who lives and who dies. The distance closes. 15 seconds since the horn. The first Swiss fighters hit the road. The 15 seconds between the horn blast and first contact are the longest 15 seconds of anyone's life. The Swiss are running downhill through forest they know by touch, boots finding purchase on leaf litter and exposed roots. Halberds held diagonally across their bodies to slip between trees, breathing hard but controlled. They're not screaming yet. That comes later. Right now they're just moving fast, using gravity like a catapult uses tension. The sound is wrong for what's about to happen. Just boots on dirt and the crack of branches and heavy breathing. Like a hunting party, not an army. On the road below, the Habsburg column is frozen in that particular kind of confusion that happens when your brain is still trying to process a threat your body already knows is fatal. Some men are turning toward the slope. Some are backing toward the lake. Some are just standing there, weapons still shouldered, watching 800 farmers materialize out of empty forest. The professional soldiers are the first to react, dropping packs and reaching for weapons. But they're packed so tight, they're colliding with each other, elbows hitting faces, shields tangling with spears. The conscripts are starting to panic, but don't know which direction panic should take them. Forward? Back? Toward the water? Every option looks bad. Leopold is shouting something about forming line, but his voice is just one voice in 1,000 and the words are meaningless because there's no room to form anything. The Swiss hit the road like a wave hits a boat, not all at once. The ones running from higher positions arrive first, building the most speed, and they hit the flank of the column with momentum that makes armor irrelevant. Stauffacher is in the first wave. He's aiming for a man in chainmail, who's trying to bring a spear around to bear. But the man is wedged between two other soldiers and can't get the weapon into position. Stauffacher doesn't slow down, drives the spike of his halberd into the gap between the man's helmet and shoulder plate, the place where the neck is just leather and flesh. The man goes down, making a sound that's more surprise than pain. Stauffacher pulls the weapon free, steps over the body, swings at the next target. Axe blade catches a soldier in the side, punches through padded leather, breaks ribs. The man screams and falls into the soldier behind him. Both go down. Stauffacher keeps moving forward. This is what they drilled. Don't stop. Don't engage. Strike and push and keep the momentum going, because the moment you stop, you're in a fair fight, and fair fights are for people with armor. 10 meters to his left, a Swiss fighter named Caspar, no family name in the records, just Caspar from Schwyz, takes a sword through the stomach from a Habsburg soldier who managed to draw before the line collapsed. Caspar falls. The soldier who killed him doesn't have time to pull the sword free before another Swiss halberd takes him in the throat. The sword stays in Caspar's body. First Swiss casualty. Won't be the last, but the ratio is already clear. For every Swiss fighter going down, 5 Habsburgs are dying or wounded badly enough that they're out of the fight. The boulders start falling. Rudolf Rading's teams on the upper slope, using leverage and logs to push limestone rocks the size of wine barrels over the edge. They've calculated the trajectory, but calculation meets chaos. Some of the boulders hit exactly where intended, crashing into the densest part of the column, taking out 3 or 4 men with each impact. One boulder hits a horse directly, kills it instantly, the rider trapped underneath, screaming. Another boulder misses the column entirely, splashes into the lake, sends up a geyser of water that soaks 20 men. But even the misses do damage. The sound alone, that deep crashing boom of stone hitting earth, is making the horses panic. War horses, trained for battle, but not trained for things falling from the sky. They're rearing, bolting, throwing riders. Some run toward the lake. The water is cold enough to shock, deep enough to drown. Men in full plate armor go under and don't come back up. The lake is claiming its share. In the Habsburg vanguard, 200 meters ahead of the main slaughter, the cavalry commander is trying to process conflicting information. He hears fighting behind him, sees nothing ahead. His job is to scout forward and secure the route. But if the main column is under attack, his job is to turn back and relieve them. The problem is geometric. The road is 12 feet wide. Turning 200 mounted knights in a 12-foot corridor is like trying to turn a freight train in a hallway. He makes the decision. They'll dismount and fight on foot. Starts giving orders. Some of his men don't hear him over the noise. Some hear him and ignore the order because dismounting an armor on muddy road while you're under attack is asking to die tired. The formation breaks before it was ever really formed. Some knights are turning their horses. Some are dismounting. Some are trying to ride back toward the fight. They collide with each other. A horse goes down, takes 2 others with it. Now there's a pile of screaming animals and cursing men blocking the road, and nobody can get past, and the Swiss haven't even reached them yet. Arnold von Winkelried and his blocking force are at the southern exit of the pass, exactly where Stauffacher positioned them. Their job is simple. Don't let anyone escape. They're watching the tail end of the Habsburg column, the supply wagons and rear guard, trying to decide if they should retreat or advance. Arnold makes the decision for them. 50 Swiss fighters charge out of the forest at the rear guard. It's not a fair fight. The rear guard is maybe 80 men, mostly light cavalry and wagon drivers. They break immediately. Some try to run back north. Can't. The road is blocked by their own column. Some abandon the wagons and run into the forest. Bad choice. The forest belongs to the Swiss. The ones who surrender get killed anyway, because the Swiss aren't taking prisoners. Can't afford to. Don't have the infrastructure to hold them. Don't have the food to feed them. Don't have the time to guard them. Surrender gets you a faster death than fighting, but it doesn't get you life. Back in the killing zone, Leopold is starting to understand what's happening to him. This isn't a skirmish. It's not a raid. It's a designed catastrophe, and he's in the center of it. His bodyguards have formed a tight circle around him, shields up, but they're stationary, and the Swiss are flowing around them like water around a rock, killing everyone who isn't in that circle. Leopold can see his own standard falling. The bannerman took a halberd to the chest, went down, still holding the pole, and a Swiss fighter grabbed it and threw it into the lake. That's a problem beyond the tactical. The banner was the command and control element. It's how units knew where the command post was. Without it, Leopold is just another knight in fancy armor, and his orders don't propagate because nobody knows where he is or if he's even alive. He tries to organize a counterattack, shouts at the nearest officer to form a spear wall. The officer is already dead, face down in the mud with a boot print on his back where a Swiss fighter used him as a stepping stone. Leopold turns his horse, trying to find space to think. There is no space. Men are packed shoulder to shoulder. The Swiss are above them on the slope, below them on the road, behind them at both exits. The only direction that's empty is the lake, and that direction is death. One of Leopold's bodyguards, a knight named Klaus von Reckberg, name preserved because he survived, grabs Leopold's bridle, pulls him close, shouts over the screaming, "My lord, we have to leave. Now." Leopold starts to argue. Von Rechberg doesn't let him. "If you die here, your brother loses the election. If you retreat, you can rebuild. But you have to decide now." That's the turning point. Not a heroic last stand, not a desperate rally, just math. Leopold looks at the fight around him and does the calculation. He can stay and die with his men and be remembered as a brave fool, or he can leave and be remembered as a coward who survived. The survival option includes the possibility of redemption later. The dying option doesn't. He makes the choice every commander makes when the battle goes wrong. He chooses to live. Tells von Rechberg to get him out. Von Rechberg and 3 other bodyguards force a path north, toward where the vanguard should be. They're fighting their way through their own men now, Habsburgs who are in the way, using their horses to push through the crowd. Leopold doesn't look back. If he looks back, he might change his mind. And changing his mind right now means dying. Stauffacher sees Leopold leaving, recognizes him by the quality of armor, the number of guards, the direction of movement. For a moment, he considers trying to chase him down, decides against it. Killing Leopold would be satisfying, but it's not the objective. The objective is making this so costly that Vienna doesn't try again. Dead Duke would accomplish that, but so does escaped Duke who has to explain how he lost 9,000 men to farmers. Let him run. Let him carry the story back. That's more valuable than a corpse. The Habsburg infantry is collapsing. Not slowly. Fast. The kind of collapse that happens when unit cohesion breaks and every man decides that the army's survival is less important than his own. They're throwing down weapons, taking off helmets so they can run faster. Some are trying to surrender. Hands up, calling out in German that they yield, asking for quarter. The Swiss aren't giving it. This isn't cruelty exactly. It's practicality, mixed with rage, mixed with the fact that once you start killing, it's hard to stop. A Swiss fighter pulls a Habsburg soldier off his feet with a halberd hook, drags him down, finishes him with a spike. The soldier was already wounded. Probably would have died anyway, but probably wasn't fast enough. Another Swiss fighter, an older man, maybe 50, from Uri, is standing over a wounded Habsburg conscript who can't be more than 18. The conscript is begging in German the older man might not even speak. The halberd comes down. The begging stops. The older man moves to the next target. His face is blank, not angry, not satisfied, just working. The professionals, the ones who've been in fights before, are trying to make it to the lake edge and wade along the shore to get out of the killing zone. Some of them make it 20 meters before the weight of their armor pulls them under. Some make it farther, get around the curve where the Swiss aren't positioned as densely, pull themselves onto the bank exhausted and retching lake water. These are the men who will survive to tell the story. Most of them don't make it that far. Most of them die on the road or in the forest or in the water, and their bodies will be found weeks later when the Swiss finally get around to clearing the pass. The vanguard cavalry is trapped at the front of the column, cut off from the main body by distance and death. Some of them try to charge back on horseback. Suicide. The road is too narrow, too muddy, too crowded with their own wounded. Horses slip, go down, take riders with them. The riders who don't break bones in the fall get killed where they lie. Some of the knights dismount and try to fight on foot. Better tactic, but still doomed. They're moving uphill towards Swiss fighters who are moving downhill. Gravity wins. A Habsburg knight in beautiful plate armor, probably cost his family a fortune, plants his feet and swings his sword at a Swiss fighter coming down the slope. The Swiss fighter doesn't block, just lets momentum carry him past the sword arc and drives his halberd spike through the knight's visor. The spike punches through steel, through skull, through brain. The knight falls backward like a tree, armor clanging on stone. The Swiss fighter pulls his weapon free and keeps moving. Doesn't even check if the man is dead. Dead is assumed. Rudolf Reding, the boulder specialist, has switched to halberd work now that the rocks are all rolled. He's fighting methodically, staying with his unit, two-line formation even in chaos. Front line strikes, back line ready. He sees a gap in the Habsburg line, points it out to the man next to him. They exploit it together. Two halberds from different angles hitting the same target. The target goes down hard. They step over him, keep pushing. This is how the Swiss are winning. Not individual heroics. Coordinated violence. They're staying in small groups, supporting each other, using their weapons the way they were designed. The Habsburgs are fighting as individuals, every man for himself, and individuals lose to units every time. By 7:45, 30 minutes after first contact, the battle is effectively over. It's not over in the sense that the killing stops. The killing continues for another 10 minutes. But it's over in the sense that the outcome is decided. The Habsburg column has ceased to exist as a military formation. It's now just a collection of dead, dying, and fleeing individuals. The Swiss are pursuing, but not far. Stauffacher is calling them back. The horn sounds again, different pattern this time, 2 short blasts. Recall. Some of the Swiss fighters don't want to stop. They're amped on adrenaline and rage and the particular high that comes from winning a fight you were supposed to lose. But discipline holds. They stop chasing. Form up. Start the ugly work of making sure the wounded enemy don't get up again. This is the part that doesn't make it into the heroic versions. The Swiss moving through the battlefield, finishing the wounded. It's not murder exactly. It's battlefield triage in reverse. Anyone who might recover enough to fight again gets a halberd to the throat. Anyone who's clearly dying gets left alone to die on their own schedule. The screaming is constant. Hurt men calling for help in German, in Italian, in dialects. The Swiss don't speak. Some of them are calling for their mothers. Some are praying. Some are just screaming wordlessly because pain doesn't require language. The Swiss tune it out. If you can't tune it out, you can't do this work. And this work needs doing, because an enemy who might survive is an enemy who might come back. Stauffacher finds the Habsburg banner in the lake, soaked and heavy, pulls it out, looks at the Habsburg colors running in the water, thinks about sending it to Vienna as a message, then decides burning it is better. They burn it on the shore. The smoke is visible for miles. Other Swiss fighters are stripping armor from bodies. This is the practical part. A suit of plate armor is worth more than a year's income for most of these men. The weapons, the horses, the supplies from the wagons, all of it gets collected, inventoried, distributed. This is prize money. This is what makes the risk worthwhile in economic terms. Arnold von Winkelried's blocking force at the southern exit has killed everyone who tried to run that direction. Now they're going through the supply wagons, food, tents, spare weapons. One wagon full of coin, payment for the mercenaries. That wagon alone is worth more than Schwyz Canton's annual revenue. They load it onto a cart, prepare to haul it back. Another wagon has personal effects, letters, maps, Leopold's baggage. They burn most of it. Keep the maps. The maps show Habsburg thinking, Habsburg intelligence, Habsburg assumptions about the region. Valuable for different reasons. The lake is full of bodies, floating face down, armor pulling them under. Air trapped in clothing keeping some of them partially buoyant. The water at the shore is red, not metaphorically, actually red, enough blood that you can see the color change. Fish are already starting to feed. By tomorrow, the lake will be an ecological disaster. By next week, it'll be fine. Water is good at processing death. Stauffacher does a count. Rough estimate, because bodies are scattered over 3 kilometers, and some are underwater, and some are in the forest where they ran and died later. Habsburg dead. He estimates 1,500 to 2,000. Habsburg wounded who'll die in the next few days. Another 300 to 500. Habsburg captured, 0. Habsburg escaped, maybe 2,000 to 3,000. Most of them from the rearguard that never entered the pass or the vanguard that managed to get away before the trap closed completely. Swiss dead. He counts 64 bodies. Swiss wounded, maybe 120, half of them serious enough that they might not make it. The ratio is catastrophic. For the Habsburgs, someone asks Stauffacher if they should pursue the escapees. He shakes his head. Let them run. Let them tell the story. We want Vienna to know exactly what happened here. We want them to know that mountains eat armies. He pauses, looks at the carnage. And we want them to know we'll do it again if they come back. The Swiss start clearing the road. Bodies get dragged to the side, piled in the forest for later burial or burning. The wounded Swiss get carried back to Schwyz for treatment. The captured weapons and armor get sorted. The horses that survived get rounded up, maybe 200 animals, terrified and exhausted. Valuable. The wagons get hitched and moved. By noon, the road is passable again. If you didn't look at the blood in the dirt, or the bodies in the trees, or the lake full of armor, you might not even know a battle happened here. But Stauffacher knows. Everyone knows. They just killed thousands of men in 40 minutes, using nothing but terrain and discipline and weapons designed for slaughtering livestock. They've proven something dangerous. That professional armies can be beaten. That overwhelming force doesn't matter if geography gets a vote. That farmers with knowledge of ground are more dangerous than knights with expensive armor. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. And the demonstration is going to change how wars are fought in these mountains for the next 200 years. By evening, Stauffacher is sitting on a log by the lake, drinking water, staring at the surface where bodies are still visible under the darkening sky. Another fighter sits next to him. Young man. One of the ones who was terrified before the fight. Covered in blood now, none of it his own. The young man says quietly, "We won." Stauffacher doesn't look at him, just keeps staring at the water. We survived. The winning comes later, if Vienna lets us. November 16th, 1315. The morning after. The Swiss are still clearing bodies. The work is methodical and grim. Drag a corpse to the forest edge. Strip the armor if it's worth keeping. Check pockets for coin. Move to the next one. Some of the bodies are starting to stiffen. Others are still warm. The smell is beginning. Blood and shit and lake water. By tomorrow it'll be worse. They work in shifts, rotating men out when the nausea gets too bad. Nobody talks much. What's there to say? We won? Everyone knows they won. The evidence is stacked in the forest like cordwood. Stauffacher hasn't slept. Can't. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the moment the Swiss hit the road, sees the first man go down under his halberd, sees the lake filling with armor. He keeps working, because working is better than thinking. Around midday, a messenger arrives from Lucerne Canton. They've heard about the battle. Want to know if the Swiss Confederation is accepting new members. Stauffacher almost laughs. 24 hours ago, they were 3 valleys hoping to survive. Now they're a military power that other regions want to join. The messenger doesn't understand why Stauffacher looks so tired. This is a victory. This is worth celebrating. Stauffacher tells him they'll discuss terms next week, sends him away, goes back to counting the dead. The count stabilizes over the next few days. Habsburg casualties: between 1,500 and 2,000 killed outright, another 400 to 500 who died of wounds in the week after. Swiss casualties: 68 dead, 143 wounded, of whom maybe 30 will die from infection or complications. The ratio is worse than anyone expected. Worse meaning better, militarily. Worse meaning harder to process, morally. They killed 20 men for everyone they lost. That's not a battle. That's an industrial process. And now they have to live with having run that process on human beings who were mostly just following orders and wanted to go home. The loot is substantial: 15 to 20,000 silver marks in equipment, coin, and supplies. More than the 3 cantons' combined annual revenue. They distribute it based on contribution. Schwyz gets the largest share. Uri and Unterwalden split the rest. Individual fighters get a portion based on whether they were in the first wave or support. The economics are clean. The feelings are complicated. A farmer from Uri named Jakob walks away with a suit of plate armor worth 3 years of his income. He tries it on once, finds it doesn't fit, can't bring himself to sell it or melt it down. Just hangs it in his barn where he has to look at it every day. Reminder of the man he killed to get it. Now watch Leopold. He reaches Habsburg territory 3 days after the battle with 50 knights, no supplies, and a story nobody wants to hear. He has to report to his brother Frederick. The meeting happens in Vienna, late November, behind closed doors, but with enough witnesses that the details leak. Frederick isn't angry. Angry would be easier to handle. He's cold, calculating, looking at Leopold the way you look at a tool that broke when you needed it most. Leopold tries to explain the terrain, the ambush, the impossibility of fighting in those conditions. Frederick cuts him off. I don't need excuses. I need you to tell me how 9,000 men lost to farmers. Leopold starts to say they weren't farmers, they were. Frederick raises a hand. What they were doesn't matter. What people will say they were is farmers. Do you understand what that does to us? Leopold understands. The political damage is catastrophic. Frederick is in the middle of fighting Ludwig of Bavaria for the imperial crown. This loss makes him look weak. If he can't control 3 mountain valleys, how can he claim to control an empire? The whisper campaign starts immediately. Maybe the Habsburgs aren't invincible. Maybe their authority is negotiable. Maybe resistance is possible. Other regions start watching. Start calculating. The Swiss just gave everyone a blueprint for saying no. Frederick makes the only decision that makes political sense. Leopold is stripped of major command. Not officially. There's no ceremony, no public humiliation. He just stops being invited to military councils, stops being given important assignments. He lives another 37 years, until 1352, in increasingly marginal roles. Garrison duty, ceremonial positions, the kind of jobs you give to someone who's too connected to fire but too damaged to use. He dies in bed, which is more than most of his men got. But he dies having spent nearly 4 decades being the Habsburg who lost to farmers. History doesn't record whether he thought about Morgarten on his deathbed. He probably didn't need to. Everyone else had thought about it for him. The immediate Habsburg response to Morgarten is nothing, not because they forgive, because they're broke. Frederick's imperial campaign burns through money faster than tax revenue comes in. Organizing another punitive expedition would cost another 20,000 marks they don't have, so they pivot to economic warfare, trade sanctions, diplomatic pressure. trying to isolate the Swiss from potential allies. It doesn't work. The Swiss have something better than allies now. They have a reputation. Word spreads. Schwyz, Uri, Unterwalden, 3 valleys with a combined population of 20,000, just destroyed a professional army 10 times their size. That story travels through merchant networks, mercenary companies, noble courts. By 1316, everyone in Central Europe has heard some version of it. By 1320, the numbers have inflated. Some accounts claim Leopold had 20,000 men. By 1350, some claim 30,000. The truth is already secondary to the myth. December 1315. Lucerne joins the Confederation, not because of shared values or cultural affinity, because of math. Being allied with the people who just proved they can kill Habsburgs is better than being the next target. The Confederation expands. Zurich joins in 1351, Bern in 1353. Each new member brings resources, territory, men. By 1400, the Swiss Confederation is 8 cantons. By 1500, it's 13. Morgarten was the proof of concept. Everything after is scaling up. But scale creates problems the original 3 valleys didn't have to think about. Bigger confederation means more coordination required, more politics, more internal disputes. And it means a professional military capacity that's too valuable to waste. This is where the story gets complicated. The Swiss discover they're very good at violence. Other people are willing to pay for that skill. By 1330, Swiss mercenaries are fighting in northern Italy. By 1400, they're in every major European conflict. By 1450, they're the most sought-after soldiers in Europe. And selling military service has become a major export. The Confederation that started with men fighting to stay free from outside control ends up with men fighting for outside paymasters who can afford the fees. Stauffacher doesn't live to see most of this. He dies in 1343, age somewhere in his 60s, from causes the Chronicles don't specify. Probably just age. He watches the first wave of expansion, watches Lucerne and other cantons join, watches the beginning of the mercenary trade. Late in life, this is reconstructed from later accounts, possibly apocryphal. He's asked by a younger man whether Morgarten was worth it. Stauffacher's response, if he actually said it, cuts deeper than the question intended. We fought at Morgarten to be free. Now we sell our freedom to anyone with coin. I don't know if we won. The young man doesn't understand what he means. Stauffacher doesn't explain, just goes back to watching the road, the same road where he killed 2,000 men 30 years earlier. The tactical revolution takes longer, but runs deeper. Morgarten proved a principle. Disciplined infantry with long pole weapons can beat heavy cavalry if terrain is right. The Swiss formalized this into doctrine. The pike square. 100 to 200 men in tight formation, pikes 18 feet long, arrayed in depth so the front 3 ranks have pikes extending forward like a porcupine, nearly impenetrable from the front, vulnerable from the flanks and rear, but if you can protect those, the formation is devastating. They tested at Leopold in 1339. Works again. At Sempach in 1386. Works again, even on flatter ground. By 1400, every army in Europe has to have an answer to Swiss pike squares. Some find the answer: combined arms tactics, artillery, careful terrain selection. Most don't. For roughly 200 years, from 1315 to 1515, the Swiss lose maybe 8 battles out of 76. The winning percentage is absurd, but winning that consistently creates its own problems. By 1500, the Swiss are Europe's premier military export. Roughly 100,000 Swiss men are fighting abroad at the peak of the mercenary period. That's not a sideline. That's a primary economic activity. Some cantons are pulling 40% of their GDP from mercenary wages. And here's where the moral architecture collapses. Swiss mercenaries fight for anyone who pays. France one decade against France the next. Sometimes fighting each other on opposite sides of the same battle because their paymasters are enemies. The confederation that formed to resist foreign control is now staffed by men who'll fight for any foreign power that meets the rate. The end comes at Marignano, 1515. 200 years almost to the day after Morgarten, the Swiss take a contract to fight for Milan against France. 20,000 Swiss mercenaries in pike squares, convinced of their own invincibility, march against a French army that's figured out the counter. Artillery. Lots of it. Combined with cavalry and disciplined infantry that doesn't panic when the pikes advance. The battle lasts 2 days. The French win, decisively, 10,000 Swiss dead. The myth of invincibility dies with them. The mercenary trade continues. Swiss guards still serve the Pope, last remnant of that era. But the period of Swiss military dominance is over. The men who fought at Marignano weren't farmers defending their homes. They were professionals, fighting for money in a country they didn't care about. The cause their great-great-grandfathers died for at Morgarten had become a business model, and business models eventually meet competitors with better margins. Modern Switzerland is what evolved from that contradiction. Small, neutral, armed to the teeth, but committed to not using the arms except in self-defense. Banking laws that make them Europe's safe deposit box. A political structure that still uses direct democracy in some cantons. Cultural memory that treats Morgarten as a founding myth, but conveniently forgets the 2 centuries of mercenary warfare that followed. August 1st, the date of the 1291 Federal Charter, not the date of Morgarten, is the national holiday. Morgarten is commemorated but not celebrated. Too messy, too much blood, too many uncomfortable questions about what you become when you win a battle you weren't supposed to win and then spend the next 200 years monetizing the lesson. The monument at Morgarten is modest. Stone marker by the lake. Plaque with basic facts. Date, participants, outcome. Tourists stop there in summer, take pictures, move on. The lake is peaceful. Tourist boats, fishermen. Water that once held 200 corpses now holds nothing more threatening than rainbow trout. The forest where 800 men hid for 18 hours is hiking trails now. Well marked, well maintained, very safe. You can walk the old road in an hour. It doesn't feel like a battlefield. It feels like a pleasant mountain pass with good views and fresh air. But if you know what you're looking at, the geometry is still there. The slope is still steep. The road is still narrow. The lake is still deep. All the elements that made it a death trap in 1315 are unchanged. Only the context is different. The people who live here now don't need to kill to stay independent. They negotiated that independence through 500 years of careful neutrality and financial services. The violence is historical. The freedom is current. Whether those 2 things are connected or contradictory depends on how honest you want to be about cause and effect. Here's what Morgarten actually was. A battle, yes. 40 minutes in a mountain pass where terrain voted and 1,400 men died learning that geography matters more than numbers. A turning point, absolutely. Infantry defeated cavalry. Commoners beat nobility. 3 valleys proved that overwhelming force isn't overwhelming if you choose the right ground. But also this, a beginning of a cycle that nobody intended and few controlled. Victory led to expansion. Expansion led to militarization. Militarization led to professionalization. Professionalization led to mercenary culture. Mercenary culture led to men fighting for paymasters they didn't serve and causes they didn't believe in. The Swiss who fought at Morgarten wanted independence. Their great-great-grandchildren got an army for hire that would fight anyone for anyone if the price was right. Both things are true. Morgarten secured freedom. Morgarten created a military-industrial complex that lasted 2 centuries and killed hundreds of thousands of people in conflicts that had nothing to do with Swiss independence. History doesn't let you pick one truth and ignore the other. You get both. The heroic stand and the compromised aftermath. The farmers who killed knights and the professional soldiers who sold their skills to the highest bidder. The myth Switzerland celebrates, and the reality. Switzerland quietly files under "it was a different time." Leopold learned that terrain matters. The Swiss learned that victory matters less than what you do with it. Europe learned to fear the mountains, and then learned that what comes out of the mountains can be hired. All 3 lessons were expensive. All 3 are still being paid for. Here's the thing about winning a battle you weren't supposed to win. It changes what people think is possible. That's powerful. That's dangerous. Because once the possibility is proven, everyone starts asking, if they can do it, why can't we? The Swiss didn't invent resistance. They just demonstrated it could work. The demonstration echoed for 200 years, changed how wars were fought, changed who got to fight them, changed the economics of violence in ways that are still visible if you know where to look. Swiss banking secrecy didn't come from nowhere. It came from a culture that learned how to protect assets, first military, then financial, and make neutrality profitable. The direct line from Morgarten to modern Zurich runs through 5 centuries of figuring out how to be valuable without being vulnerable. Final image. Lake Ageri. Early morning, present day. Mist rising from the water just like it did 700 years ago. A jogger runs past the memorial stone, doesn't stop, probably doesn't even know what happened here. In the forest above the road, invisible from below, a hiking trail winds through the same trees where Swiss fighters waited for 18 hours. The trees are different. The slope is the same. Geology outlasts history. The lake is still deep enough to drown in armor. Nobody's testing that anymore. The road is paved now. 2 lanes. Well-maintained. Safe. Nothing about it suggests that it was once a corridor of death where thousands of men learned that assumptions about power are only true until someone proves them wrong. The water is clear. You can see the bottom in the shallow parts. No bodies, no armor, just rocks and weeds and fish. 700 years is long enough for a lake to forget. Long enough for the blood to wash away, and the iron to rust, and the bones to dissolve into sediment. Long enough that the violence becomes theoretical, academic, something you read about instead of something you can smell. But the lesson survives. The lesson is written into the terrain itself, permanent as the mountains. Control the ground. Know your advantages. Make the enemy fight on your terms. And understand that winning changes you as much as it changes the enemy, sometimes more. The Swiss remember Morgarten. They just remember the first 40 minutes. The 2 centuries that followed are there in the history books if you look. But the monument by the lake doesn't mention them. The plaque talks about freedom and courage and small forces defeating large ones. It doesn't talk about the mercenary companies or the moral compromises or the slow transformation from farmers defending homes to professionals selling violence. That's not what monuments are for. Monuments are for the story we want to tell. History is for the story we actually lived. The gap between those 2 things is where the truth usually hides. If you made it this far, you've just witnessed how a single day in 1315 changed the trajectory of European warfare and created a nation that didn't know it was becoming one. Tell me in the comments, was Morgarten a victory for freedom or the beginning of Switzerland's most profitable export? And if you want to see how other impossible battles were won through terrain and tactics that textbooks said shouldn't work, stay tuned, because the mountains have more stories. And most of them end with expensive lessons and deep water.